Good morning. I'm Michael Kelly, and I lead the program management group for the product development team at Microsoft that builds our core Linux capabilities in Hyper-V, in System Center, and in Azure. Joining me is Chris Phillips, who's led the Windows Server team for a number of years and is now leading the partner and customer ecosystem team for our Enterprise Cloud group. So we've got someone in Chris with a long history with Windows Server who's now talking about and promoting our Linux capabilities. If you've been here at the conference, you've seen that we have a series of 7 sessions that give you a great overview of what's new in our data center and systems management capabilities. This, of course, is the 7th session in that series, so hopefully you've seen these slides before. You've walked through the sessions that cover our Azure consistent delivery, the work that's being done in our data center virtualization and networking and storage, et cetera, and now we're at the point that we're going to talk about Linux in this overall context. So for an agenda, I want to talk first about what Microsoft's overall strategy is with Linux. And then we're going to cover what's available today from Microsoft in running and managing Linux. So in the broader context of the Ignite conference, this session is going to focus mostly on what's available today rather than on the future 2016 releases. So we're going to start with our capabilities in your on-premises data center, or perhaps on-premises in a service provider data center where you host your operations. Then we're going to shift to the Azure public cloud, and then the broader Microsoft ecosystem, such as our Linux capabilities in Visual Studio. And then we'll wrap up. So, yes, Microsoft loves Linux. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella showed this slide at a press and analyst briefing back in late 2014. This is a great slide, and wow, what a change from the Microsoft of a few years ago. That slide got quite a reaction in the press. As you can see, put some of the articles that occurred, and you know the press is right. This is not your dad's Microsoft. The change is rippling throughout the Microsoft organization. We're seeing change happening in product development, in support, in sales, and so yes, Microsoft loves Linux. At a top level, Microsoft is committed to Linux. And why is that? It's because it's a real business for Microsoft. Just some statistics about some things that are happening. 20+% of the VM hours in Azure are Linux. This is in the Azure IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service area. And so Linux is a significant piece of what's running there in the Azure IaaS space. If we look at System Center on premises, System Center manages hundreds of thousands of Linux and Unix servers. These are in your data centers, in production, being managed by System Center. Also in your data center, enterprises, service providers, they're running Linux as a guest operating system on Hyper-V. And so this is a real business for Microsoft. This is not something that we're going to decide to step away from all of a sudden. This is a key thing that Microsoft is investing in and that we want to make happen. We've actually been at this for a while. If you look back in time, System Center has actually managed the Linux and Unix servers since 2009. We've had Linux drivers for Hyper-V available for since 2010 when we started running Linux guests on Hyper-V. And then more recently in the Azure IaaS space, Linux VMs were there on day one in 2013 when Azure IaaS was introduced. So the Linux VMs were there right alongside the Windows VMs. So this information may not be, widely known. Folks may not know that we've been doing Linux for quite a while here. And certainly the Microsoft loves Linux pronounced from Satya is now we're getting more light shed on this. We're being more public about what we're doing. And now really, the Linux and the open source work, it's a fundamental part of what we do going forward. If we look more broadly across Microsoft, different areas where we're making Linux and open source investment, both the breadth and the depth of what we're doing, Just seeing what we're doing there briefly in Hyper-V, seeing what we're doing in System Center and Microsoft Azure. But more broadly than that, let's talk about big data and analytics briefly. In the Azure space, of course, Microsoft offers HD Insight, which is a Hadoop service. And originally that Hadoop service was offered on Windows, and it is offered on Windows today, but it's also now offered running on Linux. Also in the analytics space, you may have seen the press about Microsoft's acquisition of Revolution Analytics. This is a key open source based on the R language. It's an organization, a company based around that technology, now part of the Microsoft portfolio as we extend and grow our big data and analytics capability. If we move into the .NET space, you've probably certainly seen the announcements about .NET being open sourced and being ported onto Linux. And then in the DevOps and release management space, we had some announcements at the Build conference last week. Visual Studio has release management capabilities both into Windows and now into Linux. You saw the announcement of the Visual Studio Code Editor being available for Linux and for Mac OS X. So there's a broad range of things that Microsoft is doing in the open source space, in the Linux space. And really, if you take a look at it, there's this just accelerating engagement across many different Microsoft product development teams. You've probably seen this slide before. You've heard Microsoft. If you've been listening to what Microsoft talks about, you've seen us talk about 3 clouds, whether that's your customer data center, whether that's a data center from a service provider where you're hosting your workloads, whether that's the Microsoft Azure public cloud data center. And Microsoft is present and has offerings in all of these spaces. You see some of the areas around development, being able to code once and deploy your VMs anywhere, around the virtualization platform based on Hyper-V that underlies all 3 of these cloud environments, the systems management capabilities that are available in all of these clouds, data platform and identity. So this has been the standard message. And of course, at the core of all of this is having that consistent platform across all 3 of these environments. And the announcement here at Ignite of the new Azure Stack offering that really brings that consistent platform across all 3 of these environments. That's the key direction that we're going here. But as we talk about in the context of Linux and other operating systems, you can add a 6th area here, being heterogeneous in our operating systems environment in all 3 of these clouds, offering both Windows and Linux for your on-premises data center, offering both Windows and Linux in the service provider, and then offering both Windows and Linux in Microsoft Azure. That's the key point that this session is making, is Microsoft's investment in Linux is in all 3 of these clouds, and it is consistent across all of these platforms. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Phillips to talk in more detail about specifically what we're doing in your data center.
So, we get it. We've heard a lot of feedback from people, and you've informed us what you wanted us to make investments in. So when we think about those investments, we are on a software-defined path in terms of the operating system and how we operate clouds, and we want to provide that to all of our customers. We get informed by Azure because of the scale and complexity and automation that they do. They're a customer of ours internally. They give us requirements. Plus, we take technology from Azure and bring it and provide it to the world. Because of their requirements, we are running at a faster pace, and it's actually a great synergy to have large-scale clouds. We're really one of the only companies who provides an operating system who also operates at massive scale worldwide. And because of that, we can take those learnings and drive them in. We ship Our core data center infrastructure, both again on Azure as well as on Windows Server in your data center. And everything we do, we try and accrue to Linux. So some specific investments we've done in that regard, we made Linux run great on our hypervisor. We actually do the work and submit it, and I'll go into some details on that. We've added a number of the features that we've added to our hypervisor. We have made them work on Linux. In a lot of cases, these are differentiators for Hyper-V. They were invented, and it was IP and interesting work that we provided to the world. And we went and figured out how to do that in Linux and ship that. And of course, we've done a number of work in making sure our management interfaces and the way you do things to automate Windows Server are also available on Linux. So when we do deep level, kernel level work, let's just talk about how this gets to customers. So we do this thing, and we call this whole area Linux integration services. And our developers will build it. When we're done testing it, we'll put it up in the download center, and so all of you customers can go up and pull it down directly and start taking advantage of it. The other thing we do is we go to the Linux community at the same time that we're putting it up, and we engage with kernel.org and that community. We're a trusted contributor because we've proven over the years that we can be a trusted contributor. And so what they do is they give us feedback and community feedback, and if we need to change something, we'll do it and put it up on our website as well. But after it gets accepted by the community, it flows down through the Linux kernel to the main, and the distro vendors then pick it up, and they put it in their distros, which also flows downstream to customers as they pick up new stuff. But there could be a delay of a few months before those packages or incremental distro comes out. So you can get it faster on our site, but it's the same code, or you can get it through when it flows through. In addition to Linux, we also support other versions of non-Windows operating systems. FreeBSD is one that we have been recently making investments in, and like Linux, how we do it is the same process. A little bit, it's a different community, but basically having Linux and FreeBSD be able to run on top of Hyper-V is really important because there's a lot of companies, especially in the appliance space, who use BSD because of either licensing or historic or technical reasons. And so as a result, they want to run them as virtual appliances on Hyper-V, and we want to enable that. So we've engaged and participated in the FreeBSD community, and you'll see a lot of distros on FreeBSD coming out as well. Back to management. I'm going to turn this over to Michael. We've been managing, and this is where we kind of started out. At least we did two vectors. We had the Hyper-V vector, and the other vector was in terms of management. And management, we went a little wider than just Linux. We actually went and started also on Unix, traditional Unix systems. And so we have a large base. We have customers running 10,000 plus Linux and Unix on both physical and virtual and managing them. And we know that from telemetry information and surveying that about 25% of our ops managers' customers are running a mixed environment. So no question about this is a successful use of how we manage. And this is our investment. I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's going to take us through the history of this as well as do some demonstrations.
Yeah. So, we often, what we often hear from customers is, I've been running System Center, I've been managing my Windows servers, can I also manage my Linux servers? And that's really been our goal, to enable you to have a unified infrastructure that you can manage both your Windows and your Linux servers in your data center. From a historical perspective, this is something we started a number of years back. As you can see from the slide, we've really been increasing from a momentum standpoint as we've gone from Ops Manager to Config Manager to VMM to Data Protection Manager, and picked up the management of Java app servers along the way. And we're announcing as part of the preview here, the technical preview 2, that for System Center we'll be managing Apache and MySQL in Ops Manager as well. So this is an area where our investment has continued to ramp up and to increase over time as we have filled out the System Center support for Linux. System Center managing Linux can be in a variety of environments. You may be running Linux on physical servers. You may be running it on that other hypervisor. You may be running it on Hyper-V. You maybe have a private cloud set up as the Microsoft private cloud. And System Center can manage those Linux VMs in any of those environments and provide you with a unified view across your Windows machines, across your Linux machines, and across even the Unix machines. And this, again, is a standard part of our product development. This is not something that's an add-on after the fact. We do the development right in sync with the rest of the System Center development. And also, given that this is the Linux community, there is this bent toward open source. The Linux guys in your shop may want to know, what is that code that Microsoft is putting on my Linux box? And so we have open sourced most of the code for our Linux agents, so that you can in fact answer that question. If somebody wants to go look and see what is this code that's running, it's out there. You can take a look at it, you can rebuild it, and do kind of the standard open source stuff there. In the systems management space, we want to take it beyond just the base Linux operating system. So on the Windows side of the world, of course, you can get management packs for Exchange, for SQL Server, SharePoint, the Microsoft products. In the Linux and open source world, it's the LAMP stack, for example. And so, again, as part of the technical preview 2 here, we're introducing management packs for the Apache web server, for the MySQL database. I got a couple of screenshots up there. There's a session later this week, on Thursday, I think, or actually Friday morning, where we'll go into a deeper dive on what we're doing with Apache and MySQL. We've also, for a number of years, had monitoring of Java application servers. Many of the apps that you'll be running on Linux are Java-based. You've got Tomcat, you've got JBoss, and then actually not open source, but in the proprietary world, of course, Oracle WebLogic and IBM WebSphere are quite popular. And so we've got management packs for doing that monitoring as well. So there's really a recognition, hey, you want to go beyond just the base OS. What about my app? What about the end-to-end infrastructure that I'm using beyond just the base OS, that we want to provide monitoring for those capabilities as well. Going outside of System Center, but still within the systems management space, maybe you've heard of PowerShell Desired State Configuration, DSC. First shipped as part of the Windows Server 2012 R2 release for doing configuration management on a Windows server. We're now announcing PowerShell DSC for Linux. It is now live on the Download Center as of this morning. Source code is available out on GitHub. PowerShell DSC for Linux now will allow you to do these configuration tasks on your Linux machine. Bring down a package and install it using Yum. Set up a configuration file. Set up users in groups. Configure a service to run. So if you've deployed a new Linux VM, you can use PowerShell DSC for Linux to do the same kind of configuration there. Now, people say, what about Chef? What about Puppet? What's Microsoft trying to do here? And there's really, we want to give you the choice. If you're coming at this from a Windows perspective, you've got a Windows environment, you're adding some Linux in there, PowerShell DSC is a great choice to use there. If you're coming at it from the other direction, you've maybe already got a big investment in Chef or Puppet, and you want to make use of that, by all means, use Chef in your Linux environment. This is the new sort of open Microsoft. We're not going to force you to use DSC. As we build some of the higher level constructs around the Azure stack, and so forth. Yes, we're going to hook that into DSC, but we're going to make sure, and it's part of my job from the Linux standpoint, to make sure that you have that choice, that you can use Chef, use Salt, Ansible, any of the other things that may be out there. So we want to offer DSC as a great way to get consistency between Windows and Linux, but we also want to give you that choice to use other open source tools if that's what you've already got an investment in. Just a little bit about customer case studies. So we've got a number of case studies up on the website. These are customers who are using the Microsoft stack to run and manage Linux. You see a wide variety of customers here. You see commercial organizations, governmental organizations, educational organizations, North American, European, Asian, etc. And I think, we see a common message in some of the quotes that are in these case studies of, it's been great that I can take my existing infrastructure. I can use one infrastructure for managing Windows and for managing Linux. I don't have to bifurcate into separate hypervisors, separate systems management infrastructures, and I can run that all together. So great references up on the Microsoft website in the case studies area, but you can go take a look at some of these. And this is, of course, just a small sample of the organizations that are making use of the Microsoft stack to run Linux. I'm going to switch now and do a quick demo. This is just to give you a little flavor for what running Linux in the Microsoft stack looks like. I'm going to put my hat on here as the IT administrator who is managing the fabric. And in that case, of course, I'm using System Center Virtual Machine Manager. I'm in the VMM console at this point. I've got a small cluster set up with 3 Hyper-V hosts, HV1, HV2, HV03. And of course, you can see that I've got a mix of operating systems running on HV01. I've got some CentOS 7, I've got some Windows Server 2012 R2, and I've got a Windows Server Technical Preview running here. And just like I could on a Windows machine, for example, I can do connect or view via console, and now I've got a Linux console here right in VMM. This is using Hyper-V console capabilities. This is not a network connection via SSH, but I can log in. And if I type it in correctly, and I've got a Linux console here that I can ls and I can ps, etc., exit back out of that. So I've got a full console here, just like I would have on the Windows side. We can also take a look in the VMM library, for example. The way you spin up new VMs in Virtual Machine Manager is from a template, and I've got a few templates here that are based on Linux images. And if we look at the properties, for example, of this Ubuntu 14.04 image, you'll see that in the OS configuration area, this is specific to Linux. We're talking about root credentials here. It knows that this is a Linux template, and we're doing the right thing. Run once commands. These are command lines that will get executed once the new VM is deployed. This is where you might invoke PowerShell DSC for Linux, where you might invoke Chef. And you can see we've got Linux command lines here. So this is just one of the examples of the things that we've done within the Fabric Administrator view to make sure that Linux is managed as a first-class citizen right alongside Windows. If we switch our hats now and put on the hat of a tenant, somebody who's actually consuming these resources from a private cloud. This is the Windows Azure Pack interface. I can see I've got a couple of virtual machine roles here. If I drill down into a particular role and look at the instances there, I've got a virtual machine running. I can see the status of that virtual machine. This is standard Azure Pack behavior. And you'll notice again, this is a CentOS 7 operating system. I can go in and create a new virtual machine from the gallery, and I can see the images that I have available. In fact, these are the same images that are showing up in VMM, but of course, Azure Pack is the tenant interface on top of what VMM gives you as the Fabric Manager interface. So full flexibility here to do Linux right alongside the Windows within your tenant interface. Let's shift now and talk just a little bit about, put yet another hat on. I'm the operations management hat now. I got the guy who's got to keep this stuff running. And if we go into System Center Operations Manager, you can see, of course, I've got some Linux machines here that I am managing with Ops Manager, monitoring. One of the key things you can look at, for example, is the Health Explorer in Ops Manager. And you can see the kinds of things that we are monitoring out of the box with the Linux management packs that we offer for Ops Manager. And so we can look at hardware availability, and we're checking, for example, that the network adapter is healthy. We're looking at the root file system. And this has been, of course, made appropriate for Linux. We're monitoring inode counts, for example, to make sure that you're not running out of inodes in your Linux file system. We are monitoring performance information about the operating system. And so you can see a whole bunch of performance counters. And again, these are Linux specific. So the Linux kernel has this concept of deferred procedure calls. So you get your DPC percent utilization. Megabytes of swap space is being monitored. So all of this is built into the management packs that Microsoft provides you, yet it's the same consistent Ops Manager interface that you would be using for monitoring your Windows machines as well. Finally, let's take a quick look. In the session yesterday around System Center, there was a quick demo of some monitoring of the Apache HTTP server. I'm going to show the monitoring of a Java app server. This is an instance of JBoss that is running on a machine here. And we're collecting a whole bunch of information about that JBoss instance. We're monitoring it for health. We're monitoring it for performance information. We get a whole bunch of performance information about the garbage collector, for example, that comes out of the box, heap memory usage, other interesting things that you're going to want to monitor on your Java application servers. So this just gives you a quick feel, a viewpoint. We've got other sessions that will give you a deeper dive into some of this. But we're monitoring Linux as a first-class citizen. We're running Linux as a first-class citizen on Hyper-V, and this just gives you a feel for what that looks like. All right, we're going to switch back to public cloud. Chris, let's see. We'll hit the and make a shift over here and talk about Azure.
Okay, so we kind of covered your data center, what it's like, what we can provide there. On Azure, we have a lot of investments, and those capabilities we talked about really cross both the IaaS side and the PaaS side, as well as offering services that are specifically built using Linux. In addition, we're... Oh, I'm not mic'd. I am mic'd. I'm not off. Is that better? Yes. Sorry. I'm trained to turn it off when I go off stage. Anyway, so we've kind of crossed all the capabilities of Azure, both on IaaS, PaaS, as well as in a hybrid environment. So from your data center or private cloud or service provider cloud up to Azure. And I want to kind of touch on that. And again, we're also providing specific stuff. So examples of work we've done for Windows and Linux is like our new G series. So G is our Gorilla or Gigantic, or it's the big VM that you can buy. And we've been doing a lot of work in providing that series capabilities for big scale-up Linux or classic Oracle Linux scale-up environments. We've also been providing Azure Backup. There's a service called Windows Azure Backup that allows you to go and back up from your data center into Azure. We also have a sister service called ASR, Azure Site Recovery, which is really a DR service. So one is more in terms of, hey, I want to back up and have an inexpensive place to store my files, folders, and back up my data. The other one is hey, I want a failover site. So I want to do asynchronous replication constantly to Azure. And be able to, if I lost my data center, just fail over to Azure and be able to run my business off of Azure and be able to create DR plans, test those plans. And in the event I did fail over to Azure, Once my infrastructure was rebuilt, I could fail back, in a planned way, fail over back to my data center and continue running. HPC workloads, big investment area for us for a lot of years. I personally spent a lot of years in the HPC space, and that's a space that is dominated by Linux, and we have used to ship both a Windows and a mixed environment on-prem, still do, for batch and HPC, but we've also made a lot of investments on bringing our batch services into Azure, because the reality is building big HPC clusters on-prem is kind of a relic. It's too expensive. You'll never get the bin packing correct on your workloads on that hardware. And if you need to go beyond that hardware, the best place to do it is in the public cloud. Because if you want to spin up 10,000 cores to run a HPC job on, that is very inexpensive to do in the public cloud, but very expensive to build and maintain that system for that one run that some scientist or financial services analyst needs to run. So we've been doing a lot of work in that area, and a lot of that work is dominated on open source technology. And then, of course, as we touched on a little bit, with DSC, doing a lot of work on what we'd call kind of the DevOps space for configuration management, scripting, patching, and general maintenance of care and feeding of images. So, in Azure today, we have a lot of ways for you to bring your images into the public cloud. You can always upload your own Windows or Linux images. That kind of goes without saying. The community has a huge depot. We also have a Linux image from the gallery that is contributed by many versions. Like I said, I think our gallery right now, it keeps growing. Last time I checked it a few weeks ago, it had like 900 images, different versions of Linux. And of course, we provide Windows, naturally in that gallery as well, different versions of Windows Server. If you notice, we have virtually all of the main versions of distros, and you can always put your own up there if there's a version or a flavor or a combination of things that you want in your image, you can bring it yourself. We decided that we'd try and kind of give you a flavor of what we provide, or as Microsoft has done integration work, versus some of the bigger things the community is doing on Azure, so the ecosystem provided. And we've spent a lot of time talking about versions of operating systems, because we're OS guys and management guys. But the reality is the value is in the stack all the way up, whether it's at the storage or database level, or at the middleware level, and languages and tools for the applications to run in. And I want you to be really clear with all of you that our interest is the entire stack, from support from hardware on up, or the operating system on up. And so, we have a lot of the partners here at the show in the exhibit areas that you can go and deep dive on their technology, as well as the community. It's a vibrant community. You might be wondering, hey, how do we decide how much integration we do? And it's really based on your feedback. So if there's something specific you want us to do, feed that back to the Azure team, and that's how it gets adopted. There's no religion or anything specific here that we pivot on, except for what our customers are asking for and what the community, frankly, rallies around. Because the interesting thing in open source is projects will form, they'll get a lot of momentum, they might peter out because something better got put together, and that's what the world decided to go with. And so based on that, that tends to find gravity and get pulled into our work in Azure.
Just to drill down a little bit on the big compute and HPC, this is something that we have emphasized, as Chris just mentioned. Azure provides you a great infrastructure that's really enterprise ready. Run Windows, run Linux, pick your VM size, pick a generic VM size, pick a high performance VM size. We're offering job schedulers, make use of Azure Batch in order to get job scheduling as a service. And so there's a whole range of workloads, of course, that makes sense in this kind of high-performance computing or a big compute environment. And then, of course, what Azure brings to the picture, of course, is the ability really to scale beyond what's even conceivable, perhaps. And so, literally go to hundreds of thousands of cores, for example, in running these kinds of jobs. One of the things that we're working on very hard and almost there on, Azure does offer some the A8 and the A9 VM sizes that have an InfiniBand RDMA controller. We've not had the Linux drivers for that up to the moment, but it's working now in our lab. My team's been doing that development work, and very soon we'll start to see public preview of being able to have your HPC workloads take advantage of that InfiniBand RDMA hardware that's available in those A8 and A9 sizes. So stay tuned for an announcement on that coming soon. Another area that's very interesting that's happening inside Microsoft is you think about the PaaS services that Microsoft offers in Azure. So there's HDInsight, and there's web apps, and there's batch and machine learning, and a variety of a whole long list of different services that are offered. And historically, those services have been offered ultimately under the hood. They've been running on Windows Server, on Windows Server guests, if you will, in Azure. And in the last month or so here, we're now starting to offer some services on Linux. HDInsight is the biggest example at the moment. This is one that just makes sense. Hadoop is an application that was born on Linux. Rather than port it to Windows and run it there, let's just run it straight on Linux. And I think the services that you see Microsoft start to offer in the future that are running on Linux will be those services where the software just makes sense to run it on Linux. So we're using standard Ubuntu images under the hood. They've been configured to meet Azure security requirements. So, Azure has all these certifications, security requirements so that you have a safe public cloud experience. And so we've done the work to make sure that Linux can operate in that environment and meet all those security and compliance requirements. And then finally, the internal operational tools. So these services are operated by Microsoft personnel in the Azure data centers, the 19 regions worldwide. And those personnel have historically been used to operating with Windows. This is a big change that's happening within the Azure operations team as they're now having to operate Linux machines in addition to Windows machines. So we're operating this service, this Hadoop on Linux, for example. We have to make sure that those machines keep patched with respect to Linux security vulnerabilities, that we can do the auditing, the diagnosing of problems. And so this is part of this change that's happening within Microsoft as we embrace Linux, is that from an operational standpoint within Azure, our guys are now making that mindset shift. One of the other interesting areas is if you're using Azure, great, there's a couple of different ways you can access Azure. If you're starting out, if you're using some dev test on a relatively small scale, you can go to the Azure portal, and that's a browser interface. That browser interface works on a browser running on a Linux machine as well as a browser running on a Windows machine or a Mac. But as you start to use more Azure resources, as it starts to get more integrated into your IT operations, you're going to want to automate. You're going to want to script this. And so if you're scripting and automating from a Windows machine, well, PowerShell is obviously the right thing to use. That's the best interface on a Windows machine. But what if I want to script and automate from a Linux machine? And so we offer the Azure CLI as a Node.js package that you can download, install on your Linux box, on your Mac, and it also happens to work on Windows as well if you want that consistency. But this gives you the ability to automate your Azure activities from a Linux command line which then means you can create scripts, shell scripts, etc., and do those Azure activities from an automation standpoint. So that, again, you get that consistency and the ability to do it on Linux as well as from a Windows machine. So I'm going to shift now, and we're going to do a quick customer video from a company called Throwback Entertainment. And they've been making use of Azure. And we just want to play this video.
Throwback Entertainment is best known for acquiring the Acclaim Entertainment IP. Since then, we've been taking these classic titles and moving them forward onto various mobile platforms. In the coming years, Throwback Entertainment hopes to release many classic titles that people have enjoyed throughout the years, as well as new IP that we hope people will grow to love.
Our most recent title that we've been working on for 2 years now is Gladiator Sword of Vengeance. It's a modern engine that was built by Acclaim Entertainment that we have completely re-engineered running Windows runtime.
In the past year, we've taken a very big vested interest in working with Microsoft Azure as a platform going forward and developing our games. We're investing heavily in the development of internal engines as well as cloud-based gaming services.
But part of the limitation that we had for cloud saving was the need in a low latency environment to upload game data. For that, we had to use Linux with SSDs. From there, we have to offload that storage to blobs running Windows. Only within Azure could we have that interconnection, that ability to send data within the same data center to take what was taking seconds to just milliseconds.
Microsoft Azure is the open platform that we found could truly unite Ubuntu Linux, Windows Server, and also Azure services like CDN. With competing cloud services, we found that we could only pick a select few services, but we wanted to choose the ones that were most comfortable with our development team.
A lot of our developers are very familiar with Linux. They've used it through school, through university, and now as developers at Throwback Entertainment. One of the strongest feature sets of Azure is the close integration of Linux plus Windows. That combination allows our developers to be comfortable, expect a certain level of reliability, scalability on the Linux side, while utilizing a lot of the key efficiencies of Windows in perfect harmony. One of the benefits to Azure is instead of asking programmers to be cloud architects and worrying about how to set up servers and linkers and everything else, it allowed us to let them be programmers, do what they do best. And with that, a couple of mouse clicks, a sliding scale, all that stuff to increase the amount of cores on a virtual machine is so simple, you don't have to start back over.
Gladiator Sword of Vengeance is just the beginning. We plan to bring over 30 years of gaming history to modern devices. Microsoft Azure enables gamers to be able to play these games anywhere, anyway.
In the last couple of years at Throwback, we've had a lot of late nights, we've had a lot of early mornings, but the one defining thing that we always have is we want to make an impact. And it doesn't matter if it's in transit, cars, bedrooms, or living rooms. We want the entire world to be interconnected. We want everyone to play the same games. And that's one of the things that naturally brought us to Azure. It isn't specifically focused on one platform or one ecosystem. It's about all devices playing together and everyone playing together.
All right, so that's just a great example of somebody who's making use of Linux in Azure, right alongside Windows, and using it as a great platform for their Linux development work. I'm going to shift now and do a short demo of using Linux in Azure. This is the new Azure portal that is up and running on my browser here. I just want to point out I've got a couple of virtual machines here, MHK Ignite 2, MHK Ignite. We'll take a look at those again in a minute. The new marketplace is very interesting to look at. I'm going to take a look at the virtual machines that are available here. You can see Windows Server, you see Cloudera, you see CoreOS. This is a new Linux-optimized, container-optimized Linux distro. You see Ubuntu Server. I'm going to filter these VMs. I can go through here and pick a couple that are recommended and certified, as well as filter those that are Linux-based, and get a view of what's in the gallery here. And I'm going to sort by just the name. And let me go, this interface lets me load some additional ones. So you can see several different CentOS-based images. You see a couple of CoreOS images. You see Oracle Linux images. You see SLES images. You see Ubuntu Server images. So those are sort of your base level Linux distros. Give me a plain vanilla VM. But there are other virtual appliances here as well. You see Barracuda Web Application Firewall. That's not running on Windows. So you can grab one of these other virtual appliances that may be based on Linux, or even we're starting to see some FreeBSD-based virtual appliances as well in the Azure Gallery. And so, of course, from the Azure Gallery, I can choose a particular image. I can create a VM from that image. I'm not going to walk through that process here, but it's very easy to point and click, supply the appropriate Linux information here. This idea of supplying an SSH key is a Linux particular concept. So the Azure portal knows that we're dealing with Linux here and lets you specify the right settings. Now let's shift over and take a look at the command line interface. So here I am. This is actually a Linux box that is running in my office back in Redmond. And I've got the Azure CLI installed as the Node.js package. This is just the basic welcome screen that tells you what's going on. But let's list the VMs that are part of my, I'm going to be clear so we can see it at the top. Let's just list the VMs that are in my subscription here on Azure. And so this is going to use Node.js. It's going to go communicate over the web to the Azure interface and bring back a list of the VMs that are in my account. And in fact, you do see the MHK Ignite 2 and the MHK Ignite 1. The other VMs there were actually created by some other users of this same account. But those VMs are ready and running. I can actually perform operations on these VMs. I'm going to shut down this particular VM. And so this actually takes a couple of minutes or a minute or so to run to do the actual shutdown process. Again, this is going to communicate with Azure, do the shutdown. It'll run here in a minute in the background. But because these are all Linux command lines, I can then, of course, use pipelines, use other Linux tools to process the output. I can write shell scripts that are made up of these command lines and really get the full ability to script and to automate the process of doing operations in Azure from a Linux machine that is on premises in my office as I'm interacting with the cloud. So the shutdown has now been completed. Again, if I do Azure VM list at this point, and maybe I'm going to pipe this into grep for the word stopped. And let's count the number of lines that I get back that are stopped. So this will just tell me, for example, how many VMs in my account are in the stopped and deallocated state. So I've got 14 VMs in my account there. I can also see things like the disks, Azure VM disk list. See the disks that are in my account. These are the virtual disks. Most of these are going to be associated with virtual machines that I'm running. But you can see I've also got a couple of Windows disks in my account. And I can even get detailed information about a particular disk. Let me just highlight one here and paste that in. And we can get details about that disk. We'll see that it's a 30 gig disk. We see what region it's in. It is the Linux operating system, etc. We can also get information about the images that are available. This is going to tell me all of the images that are available in the Azure Gallery, if you will. Now, what's interesting is this is going to be a very long list, and it scrolls around a little bit. There's about 400 entries in it. And so not all of the images that are in this view actually show up in the UI. And let me show you a little bit about why that is. I'm going to grep for Ubuntu, and we'll just take a look at the Ubuntu images here. And we'll see that Ubuntu actually does a couple of things. Canonical publishes a daily image of their daily build, the very leading edge of the Linux world, out to the Azure Gallery. Now, that doesn't show up in the UI because we don't want random, uninformed users to go run one of those Linux distros. But if you're more technically inclined, if you're operating from the command line interface, you can see the daily builds. And we daily build for 1504, daily builds for 1410, etc. And then if we even go back further in time and we look at the 1404 LTS, they've done updates along the way, fixed kernel bugs, etc. And so all of the historical published images are also available and accessible to you from this command line interface. Same thing on the Windows side. If you were doing PowerShell on a Windows machine, you would get access to the same information. And last thing I'll point out is if you want to process information in a more detailed format, you can get JSON output. So I'm going to list the VMs again that are in my account, the 14 or 15 VMs there, with the --JSON switch, and you'll see that you get a lot more detailed information. You get individual fields that you can then process with JSON command line tools for processing JSON on Linux machines. So a lot of flexibility there in terms of what you can do. All right, I'm going to shift back and cover a couple of more slides here. We've talked about your data center. We've talked about Azure. I want to do just a couple of slides on what's happening in the developer tools space with Linux. You've heard that .NET is going to be open sourced on Linux. So this will be the full .NET Core 5 runtime, the compilers and libraries you need to have a useful execution environment on Linux. This will be heterogeneous now. So not only is it going to Linux, it's going to Mac OS X in terms of the ports that are available. Visual Studio support. If you saw anything from the Build conference last week, they showed using Visual Studio to debug Docker containers, for example, running on Linux. Very interesting stuff that's happening there. Extensions for other IDEs and editors, plugins for Sublime, for Emacs. And then, of course, there was the announcement of the new Visual Studio Code editor for Linux that was made last week as well. And, of course, this is all being done again. This is open source. It's out there in GitHub. Microsoft developers are contributing to the repo. Others are contributing to the repo. We're doing this as a collaborative effort. We're, of course, making sure we're working with the Mono and Xamarin and organizations as well as we carry this work forward. So this is a key enabler. You can imagine once you've got .NET running on Linux, there's a number of other things at Microsoft that are based on .NET. And so we're going to see some of those other things coming in time as well to the Linux environment. Visual Studio itself, a fair number of things going on there, and have been for a while. For example, Visual Studio has had this Team Explorer everywhere since about 2010. This is a product that we actually use internally as far as doing the development of the agents for Linux on System Center. System Center agents for Linux. My team uses Team Everywhere Explorer to pull source code out of TFS, to do the builds and development on Linux computers, test that, and then check code changes back in again, for example. In the release management space, there's integration with Chef, integration with DSC. We've been in DSC for Linux has been in preview mode now that we're releasing that. We'll be able to carry this forward. So again, using Visual Studio to do your development work and then being able to push out what you've built both to Windows and to Linux boxes. Integration with Git repositories and GitHub. So, GitHub has really taken off over the last couple of 3 years. It's now the place to be for your open source work. Visual Studio's got that integration now to allow you to operate out of either a private Git repository or out of GitHub. And then, of course, I mentioned the Visual Studio Code, the new editor that was announced last week at Build. So, again, in the developer tool space, and this is just sort of a quick smattering, but in the larger context of what's Microsoft doing with Linux, this is an important piece of what we're doing right alongside the running and the managing that you can do in your data center or do in Azure. So to kind of wrap up, I also want to point out we do have these other related Linux sessions. They start as the next session here at 10:45 today, run through the rest of today, Thursday, and on Friday morning. So a number of 300-level deep dives into different technologies. This includes, running on Hyper-V. It includes using System Center, and it includes some of the Visual Studio and developer tools and the capabilities that they're offering in terms of Linux as well. So to wrap up at this point, Chris, you want to kind of summarize where we're headed at this point?
Sure. So, we kind of covered our, cultural attitude, our lack of religion, maybe a better way of saying it, towards open source and Linux in particular. We're super excited about the work that we're doing. How you should consider this as part of running it, in your data center as well as with your service providers and public cloud. Clearly we've demonstrated our broad and deep investment in this area and our commitment. You're seeing us putting out at a much rapid pace, even announcements we made at Build, some that we're doing here. As you go into the deep dive sessions on a particular area, we intentionally left a lot of thunder for them to explore and show you the work that's being done specifically there. We also showed you that we're going beyond just the operating system, especially in terms of managing, configuring, and doing investments. So you're seeing us move up the full stack with the community. We have a number of partners at this show who are open source partners. Not something you would have found likely at a Microsoft event 10 years ago. So give us feedback, tell us what other things you need. That's where we get the best ideas, and demand determines what we build and support in this community. So with that...
Yep, great. A couple of housekeeping tasks. This is one of the sessions that is part of the Azure Challenge Sweepstakes. So if you want to go to that website and enter this session code, you can win prizes, valuable prizes. We encourage you to see the additional resources that are available, and of course to evaluate this session. And the last thing I want to point out is we do have, if you've been to the Linux booth upstairs on the show floor, we've had Microsoft Loves Linux buttons. I'm going to make these available here.
Yeah.
We've got Microsoft Loves Linux stickers, so I'm just going to put the bag up here, and any of you who haven't gotten one and want to come get one, we've also got some drawings for T-shirts up there that say Microsoft Loves Linux. So feel free to stop by up at our booth up there.
And if you have any specific questions you want to ask, either publicly in front of the audience, we have mics, or you can see us, we'll hang out, as well as if you want to go into deeper dives on technology, you can come by the Microsoft booth. We're kind of in the cloud area, in the infrastructure part of the booths of Microsoft. And, we can deep dive on that as well. So.
You showed earlier that you can help with your list of VMs with JSON.
Yes.
Can you do the reverse, like input a list of JSON machines and have it create them? Create that JSON file and push it up.
Probably, but you'd have to do a little bit of scripting work. I'm not the expert to answer that question, probably. We could take that offline.
Well, why don't you give
us that offline with somebody upstairs.
Give us your contact information. Yeah. We'll get you a sample or something.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll be happy to stand around and answer other questions offline.